All right, welcome back everyone. This is the Happy Toolbox, and today we're going over part 2 of our Stylized 3D modeling series. Last week, if you missed it, we focused more on the conceptual side of things. We found this awesome photo of a vintage Land Rover Defender online. I want one of these so badly, but I guess I'm just gonna have to 3D model it instead. We found the clean lines and shapes that build this thing up and sketched them out inside of Procreate. We squashed the front a little bit. We left some of the details behind. And what we have here is a nice reference sketch that we can follow along with while we 3D model inside of Cinema 4D. So without further ado, let's get going on the modeling. Really quick, I don't want to waste your time, so I'm going to speed ramp parts of this tutorial that I feel like are boring, straightforward, duplications of tasks or areas I mess up in, and then I'll slow down the moments where I feel like I can share a great tip or trick about the 3D modeling process, specifically around stylized 3D modeling. And then also, I've already 3D modeled this tire. I'm gonna throw this up on the happytoolbox.com/freebies so you guys can grab that. It's not up here while I'm recording this tutorial, but it'll be up there afterwards. So go ahead and grab that, and then we can just focus on the fun part anyway, which is 3D modeling the body of this car. Okay, now we can start. So I'm going to grab this tire and copy it over into my new scene, the Defender scene. I'm going to delete this little tag off of it, leave it how it is, and then I'm just going to rough place for fun right now what I think this is. Also, I have my reference on the side of the screen over here, and I'll just kind of pull this in every once in a while to double check. But you should have your reference up in front of you at all times. Okay, so I basically just duplicated this tire 4 times. That way we just have a layout of our car body. This will obviously change as we go. I'm gonna grab a null now, call it tires, and then drag and stack these tires under it, and then I'm gonna hide it with these little stoplights over here. You should always label as you go, otherwise you get like cube 5, cube 1, cube 6, cube 9, instead of the windshield you're trying to find. So make sure you label as you go. It's really helpful. I'm going to grab a primitive cube and hit C to stamp that down. And what I like to do is something called box modeling, which is where you take a cube and you push and pull vertices, edges, you extrude parts of it to get the shape you want. And then alongside of that, what I like to do is called sub D modeling, where you model at a really low poly level. So that way you can always change and move parts, but you stack everything you do inside of a subdivision surface. So I'm gonna take a subdivision surface, I'm gonna take a null, I'm gonna stack the null under the subdivision surface, and then any geometry I create, I'm putting inside this null. And this is always how I set this scene up. So I'm gonna call this Defender and then Defender Smooth. That way I have a clear top level and I always know where to stack my geometry inside of. And like I said, this is always how I set the scene up. What is great about sub D modeling is also I really feel like for stylized models, it allows you to get really nice smooth corners. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Now you could always, if I uncheck this, you could always select all your edges, right click, go to bevel, bevel, add a bunch of cuts, etc. And you get a really nice smooth object here. But I find later, if I want to move this corner over, it gets really wacky. There's like cuts down here. It's harder to move this, right? The more points you have in one space, the harder it's going to be to fix problems. And so what sub D modeling does is, let's just go back to our cube, is the closer you move edges together, the harder that edge will become. So as you can see, if I hit KL, that brings up my loop cut tool. And I'm going to click on here. If you use these tools up here, you can actually hit plus. It adds a bunch of cuts. You can hit minus, takes away cuts. If you have just one cut, you can hit center. It'll center it. I'm going to do 2 cuts here. I'm going to do 2 cuts here. And I'm going to do 2 cuts here. And what you used to see when we turned this subdivision surface on was a sphere. But now you can see we have kind of a cube shape. And that is because we added those cuts in. But if I take 2 of those cuts, hit scale and move them outward, you'll see the closer they get to this other edge, the harder that edge becomes. So if I turn my sub D surface off, I select the other edges. I kind of eyeball it, make it roughly the same. And then turn that back on. Look, you have the same thing as beveling the cube edges, but instead of all that crazy geometry going on right here with points, all you have is this many points. And you're still going to have to do some work when you move this out. You know, if I move this out here, it's obviously creating a weird cut down here, but instead of 50 little points, I just select these and move them out. So that is the best part about sub-D modeling that I want to show you. From there, generally with general object shapes, I start without doing all these cuts. You just want to rough things out from the beginning. So let's go back to our base cube. I'm going to undo a bunch. Here we have our base cube. I still have it in that system I have. And now I'm going to start roughing out this body shape from this cube. So let's get going on that. Okay, so to fill this hole, if you right click and choose poly pen, it basically gives you a little plane you can create. So if I click on a vertice, click here, sometimes it knows what to do. So you can see it just filled this spot in. This is relatively easy. So it filled this spot in. And then for this spot, you can either click every vertice and it will fill it in. Or what I like to do also is if you go to right click and go to close polygon hole, you select that. And then one thing to mention while you're using those tools, if I go to my faces and I hit Control A, I can basically see, because these are yellow, the normals are all facing the right way. Sometimes when you use that poly pen, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. So you'll have one normal that's flipped, and that's really easy to change. You just go up to Mesh, Normals, and say align normals. And basically whichever ones are the outliers will align with the direction that most of the normals are going. Okay, so we have that. We kind of have this indent in the front. We have these two chunks on the sides. And then this section, I'm going to create a separate geometry as well, because that's the engine hood. So maybe if we get really fancy, we want to put a little engine inside of there. Another trick I use is, let's say I want, that engine hood right here. I'll select that engine face, right click it, go down to split. And that basically will create a new copy, and it'll leave your old geometry alone. So I still have that hole plugged right there, but it's split off this little singular plane in the exact shape I want. Obviously the anchor point is off center. So any of these anchor points that you want to change, if you go up to Mesh, Axis, Axis Center, just make sure Use All Objects Include Children are on, hit Execute, just slides this over. And then from there, with that polygon selected, I'll right click again. I'll go down to Extrude, and this time make sure Caps is on. Just extrude this up a little bit. Make a cut on the body here, just around the tire. And a good rule of thumb too is, as you can see, I have, this tire lining up with two of the cuts here. I have this tire lining up with two of the cuts here. This is roughly where the door is going to go, this line of the door. So it's good to think about your cuts as you make them to make sure they're lining up. Otherwise, you're going to really fight cuts against each other here. If you end up having to have like this many cuts, it's gonna create a big problem for this sub-D modeling that we're doing, because again, those edges being close together creates more tension. Okay, this is feeling pretty good. We have our car generally roughed in, so now we can start doing some of the details. So let's focus on the hood and the body itself and try and smooth things out, put the windows in, actually add lines for the doors, etc. So if I turn our subdivision surface on, these edges are working well, but obviously the sides are not. And so what I would do there is I'd create KL, I'd create loop cuts. I would hit UL to create an edge loop, and I would push these out to be about there. And then you also want some type of edge here. So I'd go ahead and select all of these. And then go to extrude inner. Pull those in a bit. Actually, for now, I'm going to take this UL, take it out. I'm going to dissolve, because I don't want those edges to get too close together. So that way I inner extrude. I try and make it kind of even to this edge here. Pretty far in. Make sure the bottom's looking okay. It's pretty tight, but it's working. And then if I turn my subdivision surfaces back on, Q is also a shortcut for that, by the way. It's looking pretty good. You'll notice here there's kind of like a little pinch happening. It's not quite smooth. And what that needs is, needs another cut. So if I create a cut there. Okay, the top's feeling pretty good. Gave us a lot of trouble, but we're there. We'll probably hollow it out in the end. I want to create another couple cubes quick, stamp them down with C. Make these two little strips going on there, little French fries. Another thing you can do, if I took a bevel deformer and I stacked this cube under there, it gives me nice edges, and it, you know, I can change this, I can change the subdivision. There's some really nice things about this, but I just find it way too hard to control certain edges and leave them certain ways. And when I click on my geometry, I don't want to like immediately snap back. So it's almost like a mental game with bevel deformers. So I just don't use them. So do with that what you will. What I'm going to do for the body, since the front here, you know, these curved parts, etc., they're kind of separate. I want them to be exactly uniform. A tip I use a lot for 3D modeling, you can see I just duplicated that French fry. I'm going to delete it actually, is I use a symmetry object. So I'm going to stack this symmetry inside of our smooth object. I'm going to add a null inside of that. And then I'm going to take the body and put a cut right down the center. Make sure it's dead center. So I hit this little triple mark, 50%. And then I'm going to go into here, highlight those sides, and delete it. And I might as well do this for the whole thing, to be honest. What I should have done for this stupid piece of garbage. So if I take body, take all that, stack it under here, duplicates it nicely. And that way, when I, you know, model one side, it's happening to the other side. This is really helpful, especially if you're doing characters or any type of objects with symmetry. It gets a little weird when you need to stamp this down and you want, these French fries to be individual. If I stamp that down, the French fries are now connected, which is kind of annoying. So I usually pull them out right at the end. So I've created a little bit of a nightmare of polys already for myself here, which is something you kind of want to avoid. We can get around it, but I have a lot of polys going on right here. A lot of pieces and parts that I need to make sure work and move together. It's not ideal, but it'll be okay. But this is the process. This is how I do it. It's kind of painstaking, but it's worth it in the end. I'm going to end up splitting this piece off here to create a door, split door, and on the actual body where I had the door selected, I'm going to delete those points. I think I got them. Yeah. And that way I can work on this door actually being a piece that we open, which would kind of be cool. I always like to have the models functional, just makes it more fun. Be able to animate better with them, etc. So think about that as you go along. The axis there. Now when I animate, whoop. Now I can open this door. It's obviously mirrored, so it works on both sides. Okay. So this is kind of a hacky technique I use sometimes. I want this side chunk to be exactly mirrored over here. And so the best way to do that is to basically split off this front piece. I'm going to split it off. It always duplicates everything under it as well. That's why I delete all that stuff. And then on the main body, I'm going to select all those points, basically delete them. That way what I'm left with, this front hole, then I'm going to delete this side, go to my axis center, and then I want this axis to line up at the far right of this. So if I go to, I believe this will be X 100, execute. Nope, wrong way. X negative 100. Okay, so basically it perfectly centered itself while being at the far edge of that. If I go over to a symmetry object and hold down Alt, it basically places that symmetry at the exact center point of your object and stacks it underneath it. Versus if I just hit a symmetry object itself, it places it at the very center of the screen, which if we did that, it would not mirror this object correctly. So we want to do that. Now we have this nice symmetry. And I can see here, okay, cool, I can connect these objects. I'm going to highlight the body and the front. And now I'm going to weld points. So again, M and then Q is welding points. So I'm going to hit MQ, or I'm going to highlight 2 points. So I'm going to highlight these two, MQ, weld, weld. Make sure you don't get any back points in there. You'll have a major problem later. So just be cautious while you're doing this. Weld, weld, weld. And then these technically, since it's still a separate object, it's not fully connected. But if I take these two objects, I'm going to pull these objects out really quick. I'm going to take my body and my front, highlight both of them, right click, and go to connect objects and delete. So that's going to connect these two objects into one. It's going to delete the other two. And now it's still a separate object though. Like if I, do this, you can see I can fully take this off right now. But if you use that technique again, mesh, remove, optimize, I'm going to knock this back down again, optimize, it should all work correctly. So now it's actually connected. Let's see if these points down here connected. Yeah. And you'll notice again, if you hit your HyperNerbs on, that's where you'll also notice a lot of errors, if there were any. So if I go back and I had not optimized and I hit smooth, see how it's like super sharp and there's points not working here? That's a sign, something's wrong. There's a really sharp edge that isn't based upon my cuts at all. And then if I just smooth this, it's kind of working, but you're going to get some pinching here and you're going to run into a couple problems. So what I like to do is I like to create some geometry that reinforces this area. I'm going to create a loop cut here. And then I'm just going to kind of go freehand. Make sure visible only is cut. If you don't have that on, it starts cutting through everything. I have restrict to selection on. Go ahead and select these. Cut there, there. Yeah, I'm not going to leverage that. Now I'm going to weld these points and make it more of that even wheel well that we want. There we go. So what's nice about this is once you start adding thickness to this whole model, which we will do in a bit, you're not going to leave it this thin. you just have these really nice curvature points to go off of. And again, you're looking at your model, you're saying, okay, this wheel well is probably going to fall off into this zone down here. There's going to be a crack in the door right here. So you want to have some clean lines to push and pull to give more dramatic look. So for instance, if I kind of pull this out this way, you're going to get some really nice rounded shapes and ability to have a lot more interesting pieces to this body than if it was just like a flat object. That's, you know, when you're rendering or lighting this object, you want curves and angles and soft edges to reflect light off of. That's the problem. If you've ever done low poly modeling, it's really cool and fun, but you know, it's all hard edges, so you're gonna end up not being able to light it or do many reflections on it. I'm gonna leave these alone for now, come back to them later. I wanna do something similar over here. Before I add any more cuts, now that I have the wheel wells done, what I want to do is add some thickness to this object. I'm actually going to duplicate the symmetry object, leave the body, delete everything else, stamp it down. Because if I were to extrude while that was in the symmetry object, you'll basically get edges on the inside, and I don't want that. So I want to select all of these, right click, extrude, create caps. This can get a little crazy. Hopefully it doesn't break. But you can see because we have all these cuts already, we might end up having some problems. So the more complex your geometry is, the more extruding, you know, isn't going to work as well. So if I extrude this out, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Maybe here's a bunch of like little cuts next to each other. So you can see these two lines are growing closer and closer together. We have a big problem over here. Which isn't too bad. I'm going to extrude it pretty far here. And then I'm going to make sure and add a couple subdivisions. So that way if I smooth this, we get a hard edge. I think that's fine. I'm going to end up cleaning up what's inside these doors. But as you can see, sub-D modeling is pretty forgiving, which is nice. It's looking pretty good. Okay, now that I've extruded this object, you can see, again, my normals are all messed up. I'm going to swap my normals, reverse normals. And then now I'm going to, once again, because I want to be working on it inside of a symmetry object, I'm going to highlight, select, delete. Oops. Actually, I want to select the other side. And I'm going to crack open this body object again. I'm going to throw this new body inside of it. And then another thing I like to do that I think is valuable for 3D modeling is sometimes you want to keep stuff around. Obviously increment and save, but I make a thing called Z archive. And I basically turn this off, throw it at the bottom of my list, and just throw anything in here that maybe I just want to keep just in case. Maybe there's something wrong with this extrude object on that body. I don't want to do all that work again, so I just want to keep it in the scene. So I do that. And I delete that other body piece. So now we have our body. It actually has depth to it. I turn this whole thing on. We get a sense of what's going on. It's looking pretty cool. There's a couple problem areas right now. As you can see, there's a little pinching going on here. So I'd probably add another line, another cut. Maybe I'll pull this out a little too. Kind of looks nice. Let's fix these windows up too. We got something. Going on. I'm probably not going to model the entire interior of this thing. Now let's go back to our door. Turn that on. And extrude this to the depth of the rest of our car. Caps is on. We have 2 segments, 2 subdivisions. Turn that on. Okay, cool. And then again, we're going to want some loop cuts here. Well, I guess we never fixed, yeah. Loop cuts here. Go. Make sure our body has similar loop cuts. Oh, forgot a loop cut here. Oh, ho, ho. We got it. Oh. This is looking pretty good. It's good to stop and take some moments and be like, wow, we're doing a good job. And this is what I love with this technique of sub-D modeling. You know, this looks really boring and plain if it's just flat modeled. See our lines. But now that I've separated some objects out from each other, like that door, each of these objects is going to have smoothing, like rounded corners on them. So you get these really nice little rounded creases going on places. And I think that's a really nice feature. You know, light's going to catch this edge. It's going to catch this edge. And, you know, that's this part way between realism and stylized, where, you know, fully stylized doesn't mean we want to lose all the cool parts of what makes lighting a realistic car fun. We want to make sure and catch some edges where we can. So you'll see also with this method that maybe closer to when we're done, we'll end up, you know, maybe we decided to pull some of these pieces and parts out a little bit more to get even more roundness going on. So like, look at that, right? Real quick note here is whenever I do cylinders, I generally set my rotation segments to 8, my height segments to 1, stamp it down, select the surfaces, do an extrude inner on them, and then just add 2 cuts later. And that inside of this subdivision surface looks really good. You don't really need more than that unless you're getting into complex cylindrical objects. Obviously our spacing got a little different from what we had here. That's okay. Looks even more stylized than before. I also had squished the front in my sketch, but I don't really like that. I'm kind of digging how this is just like nice and beefy in the front. Looks kind of cool. Feels more like a Defender, so I'm down. Kind of wish these headlights were actually here. Could look pretty cool, but just won't be quite the same car, so I'm sticking to it. What I want to do here is I want to give it some texture. I'm going to get a little heavy here with geometry because I'm a person who likes to add texture into my models versus trying to find textures that perfectly fit them. There we go, that's feeling good. Kind of looks like our drawing, got similar lines going on, etc. So we need some of these little details. We need some windshield, wipers, need some bolts on the back, some little lights on the front. Let's get going. You'll kind of notice some of this as you put this model together. I'm kind of noticing these top French fry pieces. They have a much harder edge than a majority of the objects in this scene. So I'm going to make them a little bit smoother. So in our top, I have my little French fry. Again, what's great about sub-D modeling, all I got to do is position these a little bit closer together. We'll only do one line here. Here we go. Look a little smoother, look like the rest of the car. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. Obviously the wheel wells aren't filled in, but I won't worry too much about that right now. I don't have an axle going through this. I mean, you could go insane with this, but this is what we're going to do for now. And then the final touches I'd like to do on this, again, is what's so awesome about this sub-D modeling technique is uncheck here. I go to my body. And we've really focused on, laying this geometry out right, where I have these edges here. I have, an edge up here. On the door, I have similar edges. We can then take some of this and really start pushing and pulling it while having this sub-D modifier on. And as we pull it, you can see we're getting some really cool extra details in here that we might not otherwise have had if this was a really crazy high poly object already. So we can go back and add some of these curves in. Obviously it messes up a few things, but I still think it's pretty sweet to be able to do this. All right, and there we have it. We have our final stylized 3D model of the Defender, and we have our sketch alongside that we use for reference. If we pull the original photo of the Defender back in, you can see we got really close to the original essence of it, but it is stylized and much more simplified like we intended. We used box modeling and sub-D modeling techniques to create this really nice round and smooth 3D model, while still maintaining a nice low poly model at the center of it that we can easily change and update if we have to. And our scene will be really nice and lightweight for animating and rendering. Let me know if you guys have any questions and leave them in the comments section below. I know this was a long one. Thanks for those who stuck with me to the end on this one. If you'd like this video and subscribe to our channel, that would help us out a ton. We're shooting to put a tutorial out every single week. And as always, if you're interested in any 3D models, head on over to thehappytoolbox.com. We have over 500 amazing assets. Also make sure and pick up that free tire model in the freebies section on our website. All right, everyone, we'll see you next time.